Hey everyone, I'm Jonah,
No, I'm Connor.
and welcome back to Rank and File Sports. After 3 years with Jackson Dart at the helm, Ole Miss will finally have a new starting quarterback, and it really looks like that's going to be Austin Simmons. He was a true freshman last season, and a lot of people are really, really high on him and think that he's going to be able to keep Ole Miss right where they have been previous years. It's definitely going to be tough with the schedule that they have, though. Some really tricky games in here. You got LSU at home, road trips to Georgia and Oklahoma, as well as more home games with South Carolina and Florida. A lot of really, really tough matchups on here. So it is going to be very difficult to see Ole Miss staying right where they have been the past few seasons, which is like an 8 to 10 win team. The schedule difficulty is a 6.5 out of 10, but they do get the majority of games at home with 7 out of the 12 and only 5 on the road.
Starting the season off against Georgia State. Georgia State shouldn't be that much of a challenge for the Rebels, giving them an 100% chance in this one. Georgia State has only had a couple competitive games against similar skilled teams, but Ole Miss is a tier above them. Then they'll be going on the road to face Kentucky. Kentucky was one of the worst teams in the SEC last season, only finishing ahead of Mississippi State in the SEC rankings. But this Kentucky team did beat Ole Miss last season at Ole Miss. And now it's coming back to the Wildcats' home stadium. I don't think they'll be able to have the same success. I do think Austin Simmons is going to be a very good quarterback. Maybe early on in the season, it's going to be a struggle for him, especially with an SEC game that early on. But I do think the Rebels should get the job done here, giving them an 80% chance to get the win on the road. Then they will face the Razorbacks of Arkansas at home. Arkansas was a 500 team last year, put up some good fights, obviously had the signature win against Tennessee. Probably going to be a similar team next season. I do think they're going to be on a similar tier to Ole Miss just because they're going to be returning a lot more guys than Ole Miss is, or Ole Miss is just losing so many key pieces, the biggest being Jackson Dart at starting quarterback. So this is going to be an interesting game to watch out for early on in the season, but since it is at home for the Rebels, giving Ole Miss a 65% chance. Then they will host Tulane. Tulane obviously is one of the better group of five teams out there, maybe looking to get one of those group of five bids for the college football playoffs. But I do think with it being a home game for Ole Miss and Austin Simmons having two SEC games under his belt to this point, he should be able to comfortably lead this Ole Miss team. So giving them a 90% chance to get a win against a very good group of five team in Tulane. Then they will host the LSU Tigers. LSU, big story there is Garrett Nussmeier is back at quarterback and expected to be a Heisman favorite, probably the favorite or the second favorite behind Arch Manning. This should be an interesting game just because if Austin Simmons is able to break out right out of the gate, then this could be an interesting game for the Rebels hosting the Tigers. But the Tigers are going to have the consistency and continuity advantage with Garrett Nussmeier as their returning quarterback, along with other key pieces on both the offensive and defensive side of the ball. But this could be an early test for LSU. So we're going to give Ole Miss a 45% chance to get a win in this game, get the upset going into their first bye week.
After that, another non-conference game with Washington State. Really interesting matchup here. I think Ole Miss is the better team, and they should be favored here, especially with the home field advantage and how hard or how far Washington State has to travel. So it's about a 70% chance of a win for Ole Miss. Then some really tricky matchups here. 4 out of their next 5 games, they're going to be underdogs. A road trip to Georgia to start it off is going to be a brutal game. Bulldogs once again going to be one of the top teams in the SEC. It's very difficult to see Ole Miss pulling off a road win against Georgia. Oklahoma, another tricky road game. The Sooners not the best last season. Obviously, they pulled off the huge upset win over Alabama, which knocked the Crimson Tide out of the playoffs. But they're expected to get a lot better this season with John Montier transferring in from Washington State to be their starting quarterback. This Oklahoma offense is going to be much improved, and I think they're going to be a lot more competitive in the SEC, which is why we actually have the Sooners favored over Ole Miss in this game. South Carolina at home. The Gamecocks, another one of those teams who just barely missed out on the college football playoffs last season, going 9-3 before losing their bowl game to Illinois. Lenoris Sellers back at quarterback this season. He's going to be really, really solid. And I think that this South Carolina team, even though they're on the road, will be favored against Ole Miss. And the Rebels still got about a 40% chance to win. But this is a really, really good South Carolina team that's going to be coming to town. Citadel after that, 100% chance of a win. Then you got the Florida Gators. Florida is another team that we are very high on next season. I think the Gators are going to be really, really solid. So only a 25% chance for Ole Miss to beat DJ Lagway and the Gators at home.
Finally, after their last bye week and that long stretch of games, they will face off against the Bulldogs of Mississippi State on the road. Mississippi State was the worst team in the SEC last season, and they are going to be the worst team in the SEC this season, making really no big moves whatsoever. I have zero faith in this Mississippi State team. Basketball, on the other hand, they're my love. I've picked them so many times this regular season, and I hope they do good in the tournament. But just because this is an SEC game, it's the end of the season, it's a rivalry game, in-state rivalry game. Mississippi State might have a slight chance in that one, but overall, the Rebels should get the job done here, giving them an 80% chance to finish the season off with a win on the road.
Yeah, I mean, looking at this season for Ole Miss, I know a lot of people are really high on this Ole Miss team and think that they can do, 9 or 10 wins like they have been the past few seasons. I just don't really see it with this schedule. Losing Jackson Dart obviously going to be tough. Even if Austin Simmons is as good as people are expecting, he doesn't have 3 to 4 years of starting experience under his belt like Dart did. I just can't see a way where Ole Miss is able to maintain this same level of consistency. So I think we'll see a slight drop down. But honestly, with how much they're losing, 7-5 or 8-4 would be a really solid season for Ole Miss.
Yeah, this is kind of a similar situation to Michigan. Said that for a couple other teams, but it's kind of true. This season hinges on the shoulders of a very young quarterback that they're expecting to change their program. Obviously, it's a little different because Jackson Dart was one of the best quarterbacks Ole Miss has probably ever had. But if Austin Simmons can break out, then yeah, I could get on the hype train and believe that this Ole Miss team can be a 9-10 win team. I just don't think having that young of a quarterback, having to play in probably one of the most difficult conferences in the country in the SEC is a recipe for success in your first season. I do think they'll get a couple wins. I think they'll be competitive against some of the top teams they have to play. Not saying they're necessarily going to have a chance against Georgia, but Oklahoma will be an interesting game. Maybe they put up a fight against South Carolina or Florida and LSU. But overall, I think this Ole Miss team has a tough schedule with a retooled young team that is going to have an uphill battle for this regular season. So I think 7 to 8 wins is probably where they'll end up next season.
Yeah. So looking at last year, obviously they did go 10-3. But like we've been saying, with losing Jackson Dart, this projected win total has dropped to 7.5 wins. But we're gonna go ahead and take the over on our projection and go ahead and say Ole Miss can go 8-4. I think it's possible they pull off one of these upset games. So, you know, it's really tough between 7 and 8 wins for Ole Miss, but I think that they can make it 8-4 this season. That is still taking the under 8.5 from Vegas, and Vegas likes the over there. I just can't really see Ole Miss being a 9-win team this season. 8-4, in my opinion, is probably the highest that they're going to end up going. So, thank you guys so much for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in our next video.